Hi again. Um, I was wearing this shirt, my Ted Lasso jersey, and a couple days ago in like Trader Joe's or something, and a woman passing by said something like, "So you haven't seen season two yet, huh?" And I hadn't because Gail and I were saving all of those episodes because we had loved season one so much that we knew we wouldn't be able to pace ourselves. And anyway, now that I'm caught up, I can safely say that I would definitely wear a jersey with the Banter sponsorship, especially if they had one of the orange ones. I haven't found those anywhere online. Those are super cool. But the other kind of corrective thing, I guess, is this is a Roy Kent jersey, and he played under this sponsor, not Banter. So, anyway, yeah, definitely enjoying season two. Um, Yeah. So anyway, this will probably be the last reading that I do from Lies from Beechwood Drive. I figured I would do one after the jump. The first two-thirds of the book take place in 1987 to 1988, that kind of range, and then we jump forward to 2015 to 2016. And chapter 11 begins that section, and it's called Getting Caught Up. Esther began her climb to 5,000 friends in earnest in 2015. She joined Facebook in 2010 because she wanted to be able to see pictures that her son posted, particularly after the birth of her first grandchild. Before long, she was reconnecting with old friends, classmates, and neighbors. Some of the neighbors had moved out of the neighborhood and referred to it as the old neighborhood. This rubbed Esther the wrong way. She still lived there, and so did plenty of other families. Dubbing it the old neighborhood seemed to suggest that it had fallen into disrepair or that it was somehow undesirable. Esther also connected with people who currently lived in the neighborhood, and so she could literally see into their world without ever having to visit their homes now that she was on Facebook. In the early days of her social media presence, Esther accepted friend requests that were sent to her, but rarely instigated connections of her own. The technology overwhelmed her at times. It felt like, just when she had mastered some part of the web page, it moved around. Or they changed the icon, or suddenly there was an icon where text had been, so it was easier to be a passive recipient of others reaching out than to do the reaching herself. And who didn't want to be friends with Esther Furman? She had enough friend requests to keep her busy, and at times she was exhausted by the end of the day with all the information she had consumed. Brenda Walker had moved, which Esther knew because she remembered the sad day when her friend packed up and relocated. But now Esther had a virtual window into Brenda's world in a way she never had before. Brenda had fully embraced the technology. She checked in to various places, loved taking photographs of meals she was about to consume, and posted regularly about what she was doing and where she was going. Brenda might post 20 to 30 times in a day, and Esther consumed everything her friend shared. Not all her friends were as prolific on social media as Brenda was, but by the end of any given day, Esther had encountered hundreds of photographs, status updates, and articles that friends recommended reading. Esther's understanding of social media was that she had to engage with all this information in order to be a good friend. Why would they share it if they didn't want her to read it? Despite that, Esther rarely shared anything of her own. How could she? She was too busy reading what others provided. Even in the old days of power walking in the neighborhood, she had been a consumer of other people's information rather than a sharer of her own. At some point, the friend request slowed and Esther came to a digital crossroad. She could either, one, sustain her current digital presence, or two, she could learn to master the technology. By now, she was less intimidated by the technology and had found a pattern and routine to her friends' posts and photographs. Brenda rotated through the same coffee shops and restaurants and posted the same type of photograph. Fun with the grandkids popped up every morning around 10. Then it was off to the Ann Arbor Beanery for a delicious drink. Then it was lunch with the hubby, and so on. Esther could scan the images and messages quickly to detect differences and move on. Often, she didn't even have to click the read more to get the gist of what Brenda had to say, or to click on an image to enlarge it. Esther decided she needed more friends. For the first time in a long time, she thought back to her brief experience with bulletin boards in 1987. She had figured that out. How hard could this be? As it turned out, not very. Beyond the initial motivation of wanting to fill her day with some purpose, she also found a target to focus on, her ex-boyfriend Daniel, the one who had slept with her old friend Brenda. It had been years and years since he mattered to Esther, but now she wanted to know what had happened to him. He hadn't married Brenda, but Esther realized she had no idea what had happened to him. She typed his name into the search window, Daniel Bird. Unfortunately, it wasn't the most original name, and Facebook returned many possibilities, some with Daniel, others with Dan, a couple with Danny, and even a Danielle or two. But despite the years that had passed, Esther recognized him immediately in the little image Facebook provided. He was the fifth on the list, and she clicked on him. She scrolled through every photo and post he had ever made. She went back and back and back and back. There was Daniel's first marriage, divorce, birth of his first child, second marriage, and finally the death of his second wife. He was single. With her own husband dead in 2006, almost 6 years now, Esther had all the time in the world. When she wasn't visiting Bruce, she happily lived in the virtual world she constructed for herself. She couldn't make the rounds of the neighborhood anymore, not physically, but online she could cover far more ground than ever before. When Jeffrey died, she had debated selling the house and moving in with Bruce. She had even started purging and cleaning out the house, and that's when she found the various stashes of bottles that Jeffrey had kept hidden around the house. It shocked her, and frankly, it appalled her that she knew so little about what was going on in her own house. The more she found, the less she wanted to live in a pool. So finally, she brought up the idea with Bruce of her moving into Eden Prairie. That would be great, Mom, but we need our space, Bruce stammered awkwardly. Initially that stung, but Esther convinced herself that she liked where she lived and her house was paid off, so why sell? Why move? If Bruce had said, "Sure, Mom, Melinda and the kids and I would love to have you," then she would have abandoned most of her possessions, quickly sold the house, and zipped out to Eden Prairie, Minnesota without another thought. But Bruce hadn't said that, so she stayed in a pool. Had she moved out, she would have found that most of the items in the house were insignificant and would have donated or outright disposed of the majority of her possessions. Since she didn't move and was surrounded by these items all day, every day, they took on a nostalgic value that she wallowed in. For instance, her laptop was surrounded by tokens from Bruce's childhood. There was the broken ceramic thing that he made in 8th grade, which she had glued together multiple times. It was tall and prone to catching on a sweater or being knocked off a shelf by an errant toy thrown inside the house. It was fragmented and had been stitched back together with glue lines. Honestly, she wasn't sure what the thing was supposed to be. Maybe a blobby tree, maybe a chunky person, or just an abstract obelisk. But it moved her to tears when her son gave it to her for Christmas, and now it took her right back to that moment. Beyond simple nostalgia and memory, the object also connected her current loneliness, though she'd never admit to being lonely, to that tearful happiness she felt when she was surrounded by her family and was gifted something that her son created with his own two hands. The happy tears of 1990 had somehow turned to sorrow in the present. This house was now empty of people, but full of things and memories connected to those things. And then that sends Esther and the rest of her path forward to the end of the book. So, yeah, thanks for listening and reading. Really appreciate it. Love getting the emails and Facebook messages and that kind of stuff. Thanks so much. Have a great day.